Welcome to the Wealthy Path, where we make money make sense. Think buying a fancy car means you've made it? What if I told you that your car could be the one thing silently destroying your wealth? Today, we re-breaking down how much you should really spend on a car and how the wrong number can keep you broke for years. Let's save your wallet before the dealership drains it. The average person spends 17% of their entire net worth on a car. And when you hear that number, it might sound reasonable at first, but let me put things into perspective. If someone has spent 17% of their net worth on a car, they've likely spent nearly 3 times as much on that car than they have on their entire future. The reality is that spending too much on a car is silently stealing from your future self. And in this video, we're going to cover exactly how much you should actually be spending on a car, even if that means saving thousands of dollars and driving something less flashy. Okay, so first off, you need to understand that cars are depreciating assets. Now, right off the bat, I know what some of you might be thinking. Well, I don't care if my Lamborghini drops in value. I bought it to enjoy it and have fun. But whether you care about your car's depreciation or not, there's no denying the fact that it happens. Like a new car loses 20 to 30% of its value in the first year, and after 5 years, most cars lose more than 60% of their value. In fact, according to research, the average car will lose 63.3% of its value over 5 years. That means if you buy a brand new $40,000 car, in 5 years that car will only be worth about $14,800. Now, you might be thinking that the car you want is different, but the reality is that all cars lose a tremendous amount of value very quickly. And if you spend too much on a car, you're taking money away from your future self, especially because, along with depreciation, you have to continue making loan payments, paying for insurance, gas, maintenance, registration, and other costs. So unless you plan on driving your car for decades without ever selling it, you're essentially burning money by owning a car. So here are some tips to help you avoid overspending on a car and keep more money in your pocket. Starting with no. 1. Follow the X of April 20 rule. This is a rule of thumb that many financial advisors use to determine whether a car purchase makes sense for their clients. And it's pretty simple. You never want to spend more than 20% of the car's purchase price on the down payment. So if you want to buy a $40,000 car, you would want to put $8,000 down. Second, you want to make sure that the loan term is no longer than 4 years. Finally, your total car expenses, including the monthly payment, gas, and insurance, should be under 10% of your gross monthly income. For example, if you make $4,000 a month or $48,000 a year, then $400 goes towards your total car expenses. Now, I know a lot of people are like, I make way more than that, so it doesn't matter. But remember, if you're spending more than 10% of your income on a car, you're giving up that money to a depreciating asset, which means you're giving up money to something that's losing value. And I know it might seem like you'll always make more money, but the reality is that you may go through a period of unemployment, or you may take a pay cut. And if you have other large expenses like rent or a mortgage, childcare, student loans, or credit card debt, it can be very difficult to keep up with those payments if you overextended yourself. But following the X of April 20 rule isn't the only thing that can save you a ton of money on a car. It's because no. 2 wealthy people buy modest cars. Look, if you're anything like me, when you were younger, you probably had dreams of owning a nice sports car or a luxury vehicle, maybe even a flashy SUV. But the reality is that wealthy people don't spend a lot of money on fancy cars. According to a survey of millionaires conducted by Ramsey Solutions, 51% of millionaires drive used cars, and another 39% drive a car that costs less than $25,000. Only 7% of millionaires drive a vehicle that costs more than $75,000. Why? Most wealthy people understand 2 important things about expensive cars. First, the majority of people who see your expensive car aren't admiring it. They're wondering who you sold out to get something that flashy. And second, while the car might look great, it's likely crippling you with long-term costs that could have been avoided if you had just gotten a more modest vehicle. Instead of wasting money on an overpriced car, wealthy people focus on investing their money, growing their net worth, and building long-term wealth. And they understand that having a flashy car isn't going to do any of those things. Okay, so now that you know how much you should spend on a car and why you shouldn't spend too much, let's cover the third reason, which is buying VS. leasing vs. financing, and start with buying. Buying a car is the best way to go if you're looking for long-term savings. When you buy a car, you own the car outright and you're only responsible for paying off the loan. However, the problem with buying a car is that many people get caught up in the moment and end up purchasing more car than they can actually afford. And since they couldn't afford it in the first place, they have to finance the difference. But when you finance a car, you're essentially borrowing money from the dealership or bank to buy a car that you can't afford. And that can lead to years of struggle trying to pay off that car. So if you're going to buy a car, stick with the X of April 20 rule we talked about earlier. Also, try to buy a car that you can afford in cash. That way you won't have to worry about making payments, and you'll be able to save on interest. Second, we have leasing, which is becoming very popular. Leasing is a way to drive a new car without having to pay for it up front. With a lease, you'll pay a small fee each month, and you'll be able to drive a new car every few years. However, the problem with leasing is that you never actually own the car. At the end of the lease term, you'll have to return the car and start leasing a new one. And since you never own the car, you also won't be able to sell it and recoup any of your investment. However, the one benefit of leasing is that it can be cheaper than buying in the short term, since you don't have to worry about making a down payment or paying off a loan. Finally, we have financing, which is the middle ground between buying and leasing. When you finance a car, you borrow money from a dealership or bank to buy a car, and then you make monthly payments over a set period of time. Now, financing can be a great way to afford a car that you couldn't otherwise afford in cash. But a lot of people make the mistake of getting a loan for too long. Avoid getting a loan for 6 or 7 years because by the time you pay off the loan, you'll have paid thousands of dollars in interest. Alright, so now that we've covered all the basics, let's talk about how you should be buying a car in 2025. And I know this sounds like a lot of work, but the reality is that buying a car is one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make. So it's definitely worth putting in the effort. Start by budgeting and determining how much you can afford to spend on a car. Remember the X of April 20 rule we talked about earlier? Then use online tools and apps to research fuel costs, resale value, and insurance rates for the cars you're interested in. Next, think about the features you need versus the features you want. Do you need a large SUV, or can you get by with a smaller, more fuel-efficient car? Once you know what you need, start looking for a car that meets your criteria. Be patient, and don't settle for the first car you see. Take your time and find a car that fits your budget and needs. And finally, negotiate the price of the car and get the best deal possible. Don't be afraid to walk away from a deal if you're not comfortable with the price. Remember, you're in control. Now, I know that all this might seem like a lot of work, but the reality is that buying a car is one of the biggest purchases you'll ever make. So it's definitely worth putting in the effort. And if you can do all this correctly, you'll be able to save thousands of dollars and drive a car that you can afford. And in general, the best option for most people is to buy a reliable used car in cash or with a short-term low-interest loan. A used car is typically much cheaper than a new car, and you can often find a great deal if you do your research. Cash is always the best way to pay for a car because you don't have to worry about making payments or paying interest. However, if you don't have enough cash to buy a car outright, then a short-term, low-interest loan is the next best thing. Just be sure to avoid long-term loans with high interest rates, because they can end up costing you a lot of money in the long run. You're going to be surprised how much money you can save by just doing a little bit of research and buying a car that fits your budget. You can use that money to invest or build up your savings, which will set you up for future success. Don't let buying a car drain your bank account or ruin your financial future. Make smart decisions today and drive confidently tomorrow. So with that said, you guys, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. As always, feel free to add me on Instagram. Enjoy. Thank you so much, and until next time.